Not only is Tennessee in the playoff, but Tennessee is a legitimate national championship contender if Nico's a Heisman finalist. Hello and welcome to Always College Football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy. Today is Thursday, August 8th, and we appreciate you coming to us from wherever it is it's coming to us from. It's the Apple Podcast platform, Spotify podcast platform, wherever you get your podcast, the ESPN YouTube page. We appreciate you guys. Thanks a lot. Jack Foster's here. Mark Kubiak's here. Jake Garcia is here as well. Today, we did this last year. Today, we're going to give a little hat tip, if you will, a little hat tip to our friend Josh Pate. I really enjoy when he does things like this. He's doing the what ifs of college football, and we'll sprinkle a few of these in throughout the next couple weeks. Things that maybe you don't anticipate, or maybe some of you do, but what if this happened, then how did it happen, basically? We try to kind of see what might materialize and what will have gone right and or wrong that would lead to the what if that we're putting forth, okay? So we're going to have some fun with this today. Go kind of all over the Power Four, hit a little G5 because there is some expanded playoff talk in there as well. So let's dive in. The what ifs for the 2024 season.
All right, McElroy, number one, what if Miami wins the ACC championship?
Well, it would be the first time in a long time that someone not named Florida State and or Clemson has basically won the league. Now, we remember Pitt won it a couple years ago, okay? So like the fake slide, we remember it, the infamous fake slide. But Seminoles and Clemson have combined to win 12 of the last 13. Where has Miami been in that process? They've had some good years, but just not enough to quite get over the hump, all right? If Miami wins the ACC, then a few things happen. One, Cam Ward was as advertised transferring over from Washington State. Last year, he, of course, accounted for about 75% of the team's total offense. That's the highest rate of a team's total offense by any player in that span. That was at Washington State. It was air raid, okay? And they didn't have a great run game. Now, they had a couple of talented backs. They didn't have a great run game. So Cam Ward had to do an awful lot. It was on his shoulders. He kind of had to do almost everything and had to run around and create, did a lot of amazing things. At Miami, you won't have to do as much because this is a team that has been built from the inside out. So we know Cam Ward will have probably been a home run in the event in which they win the ACC. We also know the offensive line, plug and play. It's been that way. It's one of the best groups in the ACC last year. I would anticipate that when you look at how Francis Maui Noah, for example, at right tackle, how he was brought along, you have a bunch of other 5 stars up there as well. You bring in a great transfer from Indiana at center. The offensive line, probably a massive strength of the team. The defensive line, massive strength of the team. Ruben Bain is who everybody knows there at the end of the line of scrimmage. He's back for his sophomore year after a freshman All-American type of season. But this is a group that's going to be legit. I mean, really, really good along the front defensively. And kind of think about how Mario's kind of built this thing, okay? Talked about building it from the inside out. Mario has a long track record of being great recruiting along the offensive line, and it's long coached great offensive lines. They had the second fewest sacks in the ACC last year. They gave up just 16. They had the second lowest blown block percentage in the ACC as well at 21%. It's pretty dang good. So that group was already really good last year. Had to replace a couple. I don't think it's going to be impossible to replace the pieces that they lost. Cam Ward can't play quarterback by himself. That means the weapons probably accelerated how this offense is going to go. Now, we already know that Xavier Restrepo and Jacoby George are back at wide receiver. That was only the second and third leading receivers in the ACC, respectively. Restrepo being second, Jacoby George being third. Yes, Virginia's Malik Washington had more, but still, Restrepo, 85 receptions last year out of the slot, very, very solid. So now they're not going to have to do it with the running back by committee either. So last year it was like Chaney for a game or two, Fletcher for a game or two, just perish for a game or two, well, we know who the running back's going to be now. It's Damian Martinez. All right, two-time All Pac-12 running back, rushed over 2,100 yards the last couple of years at Oregon State, 16 touchdowns, averaged over 6 yards a carry. The guy's the real deal. So very optimistic about what this group is going to be on offense. And then defensively, we've already talked about that. You had CJ Clark from NC State. You had Simeon Barrow from Michigan State. You had the pass rusher Elijah Alston from Marshall. They're going to be great. The big question mark is the secondary. And if they win the ACC, the secondary, that question mark's probably gone. Mish Powell probably came in from Washington, who was the nickel last year and had a really impactful presence there at the second level. You probably have a freshman in the back end that was great at the safety spot. Maybe it's Zaquan Patterson. So I think all those things would probably have to happen for Miami to win the ACC, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. And frankly, it might be the direction I'm leaning right now here in the preseason.
Plus, it would finally give the ACC conference something they've been going for 20 years now, and that's Miami to be on top. All right, let's move
Excuse
up.
me. Wait, hang on a second. Did you just say the ACC conference first and foremost? That's one faux pas. It's the Atlantic Coast Conference. So basically, you're saying the Atlantic Coast Conference when you say the ACC conference. That's one. Two, you're telling me that they had an agenda in trying to force Miami to the top of the league? No, we're going to have to disagree there, buddy.
Not an agenda, but when they brought Miami in.
Yes, I understand. You put them in the Coastal. I get it. They wanted to have Florida State, Miami play every year. I understand the conspiracy theories, but let's be real here. Come on.
No agenda. It'd be good for the ACC. That's all I'm saying.
The ACC is in a really healthy place right now. I don't care what anybody says. Everybody wants to bash it. The ACC is excellent, in my opinion. You got 3 elite teams potentially, and you got 5 teams beyond those 3 elite teams that can play up to a bunch of really, really, really good teams. So I think the ACC is very healthy right now and should have a great year.
All right, let's move up north. What if Michigan beats Ohio State again?
Well, Ohio State, I need to remind everybody, 15-1 against Michigan from 2005 to 2020. Okay. The last time Ohio State lost 3 in a row was back 1995 to 1997. We understand that right now they're on a 3-game losing streak. If Ohio State loses this game again, it means a few things. One, Will Howard is kind of comparable potentially to Kyle McCord. People say, well, he's not that, he can go, he's replaceable. Let's go get another guy. They got Will Howard. Well, some people are wondering, well, Will Howard, would he have even been the starter at Kansas State had he stayed? I mean, I don't necessarily need to go down that rabbit hole. I don't know if he would have started at K-State or not. It doesn't really matter because it's revisionist history. He's left. So he's at Ohio State now, likely to be the starter. It means that maybe he wasn't able to elevate the Buckeyes to the same level as some of the guys before him. They probably also weren't able to adequately replace Marvin Harrison. I mean, Harrison was a guy that was unbelievable. I mean, amazing. Emeka Egbuka's back. I love a couple of their freshmen. JJ Smith is going to be amazing. Brian Hartline's done an amazing job with that group. I can't imagine Ohio State not having an elite receiver corps. I'm just being honest. Of all the reasons why they might lose to Michigan, receiver probably won't be one of them. One thing that could be, though, is the offensive line could remain a bit of a liability. Now, they do bring back some starters. They got 3 guys back that have played. You add Seth McLaughlin from Alabama, who I think is a talented piece there in the middle. Had some snap inaccuracies last year, but some of those were circumstantial. I think that was a good piece to add. The tackles, though, for Ohio State, I'm a see it to believe it person. I have not been super impressed with their offensive line play the last couple of years. The other thing about this game, okay, Michigan has dominated the line of scrimmage in each of the last 3 years. Ryan Day went out and hired Chip Kelly to be his offensive coordinator. Why do you think that was? Well, one, Chip Kelly has a proven track record as an offensive mind, proven track record as an innovator, a guy that's super creative when it comes to the run game, all this other stuff. Well, he might have hired him exclusively for this game. You know why? Because for 22 consecutive years, from 2001 until 2023, 22 consecutive meetings between Ohio State and Michigan, the team that outrushed the opposition won the game. Here's the good news for Ohio State fans. Chip Kelly, his offenses at Oregon, led the Pac-12 in rushing 8 consecutive years. Every year he was there, they led the Pac-12 in rushing. And then his 4 UCLA offenses placed first or second in the Pac-12 every year. If there's one thing Chip Kelly's going to do is run the football. Now, it's going to be hard to run it against Michigan. It's going to be really hard to run it against Michigan for sure. But I know that's going to be a high priority with the addition of Quinshon Judkins, with the addition of Chip Kelly as the offensive coordinator. And then finally, the reason why Michigan probably won the game if they won it again this year, they probably created some big plays. Last year, the Buckeyes allowed 9 plays in that game of 15 plus yards and 5 plays of 20 plus yards. Both were the worst of the seasons. Okay? They just can't have that happen. And in particular, they were almost all in the second half. So they got to play better in the second half. But my goodness, if Ryan Day loses this game, the reaction and the vitriol will be as strong as probably any other game that we've covered on this platform and maybe any other that I've covered since I've been in this business for the last 11 years.
How many of those big plays were runs by Michigan too? Like 60, 70-yard chunk runs?
Well, 2 years ago, there were like those massive, out the gate, Donovan Edwards, like 85 yards to the house. Last year, I think it was more like Blake Corum for 22, Blake Corum for 17, and it was all in the second half, really. So I don't think it was quite as massive as the year before, where it was like, okay, they hit Cornelius Johnson for a catch and run hitch that goes to the house. So look, Ohio State's been amazing defensively the last few years. They really have. The last 2 years, they've been pretty solid defensively. They have. Last year, especially. Well, Michigan scored nearly 40 points a game against them in each of the last 3 years. So they're going to have to adjust that and hopefully get better at that point.
All right, let's keep it in the Big Ten. What if Nebraska misses a bowl game again?
It would be really disappointing. Just given Matt Rule's track record of building programs, what he inherited at Temple, what he inherited at Baylor, how from year 1 to year 2, there was notable progress. And then from year 2 to year 3, it was like championship aspirations became real. If Nebraska misses a bowl game this year, and looking at their schedule and looking at how everything might set up, there's really only a few ways they can miss a bowl game. Really, there's only a few. One, they continue to be atrocious when it comes to turnovers. Last year, need I remind you, for the 400th time this offseason, Nebraska was dead last in the country, turning it over 31 times. They were minus 17 in turnover margin. They have been, in the last 20 years, the worst turnover program in the country. It's insane. Really insane. They also probably continued to lose close games. We knew that was a track record dating back to Scott Frost era. How many times have we said, oh my goodness, another one-score game that goes away from Nebraska? Last year, they lost 5 games by 1 score. They have 30 one-score losses in the last 6 years. And 3 times, they lost 13-10. So your offense can only materialize 10 points. Your defense gives up 13. You'd hope that you'd win that game. They've lost it 3 times. So you look at those 2 aspects, close losses and turnovers are massive. If they don't make the playoff, it's probably because Dylan Raiola, who's likely to be the starting quarterback, I know he's entrenched in the quarterback competition, but I do think in time his upside will be very appealing for Matt Rule and who's making the decisions offensively. Maybe he has some freshman struggles. Okay, maybe that's it. But if you look at where they were last year, okay, Nebraska was in the bottom 10 nationally in pretty much every passing category. They also threw more picks than touchdowns, and not just by a little bit, too. They threw 16 interceptions against just 10 touchdowns. The only schools that were more inept throwing the football were the service academies and Iowa. So even if Dylan Raiola has some freshman struggles, it's probably not going to be as bad as it was. Because statistically speaking, it's hard to go down from where they were. You look at the transfers, whether it's Isaiah Nair from Texas, whether it's Jamal Banks from Wake Forest, you got some veteran Power 5 weapons that are big bodies, 6'4", 6'5". I mean, these guys are really big bodies with big catch radiuses, which is going to help a quarterback that might have some nerves early on in his career. Sure, they're a little thin at linebacker, okay? It's like the one spot on the team where they're maybe a touch thin. But I look at this defense, and I think they return a lot of really quality pieces. The offensive line's a veteran group. The receivers and the tight ends are all guys that have been around. They have some size. They have some speed. I'd be shocked if this team didn't make a bowl game this year. I'd be absolutely shocked. And I think they're going to be extremely dangerous for some teams with really high expectations this season.
All right, let's start off with a week one, a what if. What if Penn State loses to West Virginia in week one?
This would be, I cannot emphasize how important this game is, potentially, for the Big 12. And for Penn State, this is just a really difficult non-conference game. It's a really difficult non-conference opener. One, you travel into a place that's extremely hard to play. Okay, it's going to be absolutely insane when you walk into Morgantown and you got to play in that level of hostility week one. So it's going to be a really tough venue, really tough place to play. I've done multiple games in Morgantown, one of the most underrated places in America. I love it. That being said, I think back to what Penn State has excelled at the last few years. Okay, they've been unbelievable defensively. I mean, one of the best in the country, top 3 in several metrics, have given up less than 14 points per game. The only two teams that have fared better than that are Michigan and Ohio State. Last year, if you look at the amount of yards given up defensively, Penn State was at the top. So this is a defense that has been amazing. The one black eye, though, last year was the Michigan game. And while they clearly played really hard against Michigan, Michigan ran the ball 30 consecutive plays to kind of close out the game. 30 consecutive plays and just pounded it over and over and over again. It wasn't big plays. They weren't manufacturing chunk yardage. It was just one after another, like Novocaine. You give it time and it always works. That, of course, dropped Penn State and James Franklin's record against Ohio State and Michigan to just 1-14 in the last 10, when they've been ranked in the top 10. You look overall, James Franklin has been great in games like this. He's 80-18 against everyone not named Michigan and Ohio State. And against Michigan and Ohio State overall, they're just 4-16. Of course, did have 3 wins against Michigan when Michigan wasn't so good. Did beat Ohio State back in 16 on the blocked field goal. But if you think back to the recipe that Michigan used in success against Penn State last year, it was by pounding the football. Guess what West Virginia can do? They can pound the football. They're the only team in the country with 3 750-yard rushers last year. And what's interesting is that all 3 are back, which is unique, and all 3 can exploit you in different ways. Garrett Green, excellent. As a quarterback, would like to see him continue to become more consistent throwing it. But we know CJ Donaldson is a hammer, 240 pounds, difficult to bring down. Not a guy that you want to face in the hole when short yardage games and plays are there in the balance. Jaheim White, we know what he's like when you get him out in space. The guy's ridiculous. Absolutely electric. The Mountaineers last year averaged almost 230 rushing yards a game. That was the fourth most in the country. That was the most among the Power Five. Only Rutgers ran the ball with more regularity, 59%, than West Virginia, who called a run play 57% of the time last year. So if there's ever been a recipe or a recreating what they're going to try to do, I think West Virginia is going to watch that Michigan tape and they're going to say, we're going to try to do exactly what they did. I don't know how successful they'll be because I don't think West Virginia's offensive line is as good as Michigan's was last year. But still, I think they're going to try to pound it. I think they're going to try to shrink the game. I think that's going to be a really physical game week 1 in Morgantown.
All right, we're going to stay with the week 1 theme here. What if Clemson beats Georgia in week 1?
Well, would that officially put to bed the notion that Dabo can't get it done in the current format of college football? Tyler from Spartanburg won't be calling the next week. I can promise you that. Now, it would be massive for Clemson in the court of public opinion. It would be enormous because people are going to, regardless of what happens with Georgia week 1, whether they win or lose, people are going to know that Georgia has one of the best rosters in the sport. So there's still, even if they lost that game, there's still plenty of meat on the bone for them to get back in the good graces. But if it unveils some possible liabilities, that's something that I would be really interested to see. But you think back to just how rare a Georgia loss is. They've lost just twice in the last 3 seasons. Both of those losses came in the SEC championship game. They've won 39 consecutive regular season games dating back to 2020. That's the second longest on-field streak in the AP poll era. Only Oklahoma had a longer streak, and guess when that was? That was when they won 45 straight between 1953 and 1957. So slightly different era of football back then. All due respect to those Sooner teams. I'm sure they were amazing. I'm sure they were great. Not taking anything away. I just think winning 39 in a row now might be a little trickier than winning 45 in a row back then. Now, is it completely out of the realm of possibility? The Georgia right now is currently a 14-point favorite. Need I remind you that Clemson last year, when they went on the road to Duke, was an 11.5-point favorite. And the home field being at Duke last year, it's worth what, about 3 points? So in a neutral site, Georgia being 14 and Clemson on the road at 11, it's really not that wide of a gap when you take that into account. And I think a lot of people will look back at Clemson last year and say, well, they failed to win at least 10 games for the first time since 2010. And while that, for many, would be viewed as a significant disappointment, I actually look at where they were after a 4-4 start, really at a crossroads, and finishing with a 5-game win streak. I think they have a lot of momentum coming into this season. And they're going to look a lot like they looked last year. You got the same offensive coordinator back in Garrett Riley. You got the same quarterback back in Cade Klubnik. You would hope, at least I would hope, that Cade Klubnik will be a lot more comfortable this year. People remember, people forget. While Cade Klubnik was a 5-star and you sprinkled him into some action in his true freshman year, the guy's only started 13 or 14 games. It's not like he's played a ton of football. So Cade Klubnik, I think, maybe he's poised to make a significant jump. His second year in the offense, his second year with Riley, and with what should be a better receiving core. Now, he's got to make better decisions. He threw 9 picks last year, and he's got to have better ball security. He put the ball on the ground 10 times, 5 of which were lost. The good news is, I do think they're going to be able to run the football. And I look at Phil Maffa, and while he was kind of used as a piece to kind of spell Will Shipley throughout the first half of last season, down the stretch, he really got it going. The last 6 games, nobody ran for more rushing touchdowns, and there were only 2 guys in the league that had more rushing yards per game down the stretch than Phil Maffa last year. So, and I look at Georgia, and we've talked about this and documented this really all off season. Their Achilles heel last year was against the run. So if Clemson beats Georgia, that means that they've probably gotten improved quarterback play. They probably were able to run the football pretty well. They probably were able to create some one-on-one opportunities for their wide receivers, their young wide receivers that are hopefully going to get a little better this year, a little more consistent this year. And Georgia still maybe has a couple issues against the run that plagued them at times last year. So that's probably the recipe. But man, that would be a massive result, not just for the ACC, but also for Dabo Swinney in quieting some of the critics with how he's approached the portal and some other aspects of the current format in college football.
All right, next one. What if Alabama loses 3 regular season games? I mean, that hasn't happened since, I don't know, you know when.
2010? Is that the last time? Okay.
That is correct.
Fair enough. Now, I would also say in 2010, we lost 2 games by a combined 4 points. And it was fluky, one of them in particular. But I digress. Oh boy, that's the first reaction, right? Alabama loses 3 games, 9-3 regular season. There will be alarm bells and sirens going off. And because I think people look at the standard. The standard is the standard. I don't think it's changed just because Nick Saban's no longer there. It's Kalen DeBoer's team now, but the expectations remain high. They've been among the most dominant teams in the sport. They've had one of the most dominant runs in the history of the sport. Nobody ever in the history of the sport ever won 6 national titles in a 12-year span. Nobody. They also think about how they've played 107 games against AP-ranked teams. They averaged beating them by 3 touchdowns per game. Like it's just been a ridiculous run of dominance to think of what's been created by Nick Saban there in Tuscaloosa. The good news is Kalen DeBoer comes in having done more with less his entire career. He's won at least 10 games in 8 of his 9 college seasons as a head coach. The lone exception was COVID because they played 6 games. So Kalen DeBoer has been able to get it done. And since he took over in Tuscaloosa, the expectations are still going to remain high because they still have a lot of really good players. I think most people acknowledge Nick Saban as the greatest program builder in the country, which who can doubt that? Well, his departure doesn't mean the program isn't very, very stable at the same time. But you look back too, maybe there is some growing pains. Maybe there are some challenges, kind of a feeling out process while the players get comfortable with the staff. And look at back over the course of Alabama's history, the most wins ever by a coach in their first year for the Tide was Frank Thomas in 1931. He won 9 games. They have Jalen Milroe back, who progressed beautifully as the season went along last year, played some of his best football down the stretch in November and in the SEC championship game. Everybody kind of knows the question marks. The question marks on offense, they're a little unproven at wide receiver. I think they feel good about the talent in that room, but they're a little unproven and are guys waiting for their opportunity. They're unproven at right tackle, but they have a nice rotation going there and a competition that's brewing, and I think their tight ends can help that group quite a bit. They got a lot of youth in the secondary. There might be as many as 2 true freshmen that are starting in the back end. It's possible, but not ideal. The craziest part about this whole scenario, though, is you could be looking at a potential 3-loss Alabama team, and they might still win the national championship. Now, you're going to think that's crazy. Let me just walk you through it. Let's just say they lost on the road. They had a tough time on the road. They lost at LSU, they lost at Tennessee, and they lost at Oklahoma. Let's just say those 3 games on the road, tough games, tough environments, good teams, what have you. You lose those 3 games. That means you still, under those circumstances, you lose those 3, you still have a win against Georgia. You still have a win against Mizzou. 2 teams that are likely going to start the season ranked in the top 10. You still have a win against Auburn. Auburn's probably a 7, maybe 8 win football team, fringe top 25 team this year. And you still have a win at Wisconsin. So even if they lost those 3 games that I mentioned, clearly you lose 3 SEC games, you're not going to go to the SEC championship game. That goes without saying. But they're still in a position with a win against possible number 1 team, possible SEC champ Georgia, possible 10-2, also at-large playoff contender in Mizzou, a win against Auburn, a team that's going to be in probably the top 25 by season's end, and a win at Wisconsin. Tell me that resume won't possibly get you into the playoff? And how many people want to play Alabama in the playoff? Not many, especially as some of those young players get a little bit more comfortable. So their schedule is brutal. It's extremely, extremely difficult. And the reaction will be strong in the event which they lose a couple games you don't expect them to. But still, even with that many losses with the expanded field format, they still have a chance to go win the whole thing.
All right, let's keep it in the SEC. What if Oklahoma is the new SEC team that finishes in the top 3 of the conference?
Well, if you're in the top 3 of the conference, you are in the playoff. I think that goes without saying. I think when you look on paper at Oklahoma, the losses and the turnover are concerning. Okay. I hate to lose a guy like Dylan Gabriel, a guy that had a tremendous season last year. And I hate to lose 5 guys along the offensive line. I hate to lose Drake Stoops. I hate to lose Jeff Levy, the architect of an offense that averaged 42 points a game and 507 yards a game. Basically with top 10 in pretty much every offensive category, except for rushing. The good news is, if Oklahoma finishes in the top 3, Jackson Arnold probably played at an All-American level. He probably did. He was the number 1 rated quarterback in the 2023 signing class, got some live game experience last year, played a little in the regular season, but got a lot of time there in the bowl game, had some really high highs and some low lows. I think Oklahoma's really well stocked at the skill position. I think the wide receiver room has a chance to be outstanding, absolutely outstanding. But the big question is along both lines of scrimmage. If they're in the top 3, that means Bill Bedenbaugh, their offensive line coach, should get a gigantic raise. Imagine stepping into a scenario where you're going into the SEC and you don't have anybody back along the offensive line. But hey, if they're in the top 3, they were obviously pretty dang good there. So Bill Bedenbaugh did an amazing job at that position. It also means that the defensive line and some of the question marks surrounding the defensive line probably were pretty dang good. Some of the people that they added in the portal, probably pretty dang good. It probably means they stayed healthy too. Probably means Danny Stutzman had 120 tackles and probably bringing home all those postseason awards. Probably means that Billy Bowman in the secondary, which returns entirely intact, were able to lock down some of the receiver cores they saw. And if they finish in the top 3 in the SEC standings, they'll have a home playoff game. Because if you really think about this schedule, listen to the schedule, it would be insane. So to finish in the top 3, I'm assuming you got to be 10-2 or better, more than likely. I think 10-2 probably gets you in the top 3 in the SEC. Think about the games that they have. All right, 10-2. So you have 2 losses. Pick whatever 2 you want to lose here. It doesn't really matter. Tennessee at home, Alabama at home, at Missouri. 3 teams ranked in my preseason top 10. At Ole Miss, another top 10 team. 2 of the 4 on the road. Brutal. At LSU, a team that I feel really good about. Top 12, top 15 team at worst. Maybe better, depending on how they do with their defense. And then their annual game against Texas. So you lose 2 games, all right? Say they lose at Ole Miss and they lose to Texas. That means you still have a win against Tennessee. You still have a win against Bama. You still have a win at Auburn, at Mizzou, at LSU. That's insane. So if they go 10-2 or better and they finish in the top 3, Brent Venables will probably be considered coach of the year. I don't know how you couldn't be based on the schedule they have to run and the teams that they have to face.
All right, staying in the SEC, is Nico a Heisman finalist?
I love that he's just Nico and nobody
I'm not going to
needs
try for the last name. Sorry.
Yeah, well,
not going to do it.
What a real pro you are. Pro's pro. Nico, say it with me. Iamaleava. Nico Iamaleava. We can do it. All right. I've worked on it too. It's challenging, but we got it. If Nico Iamaleava is a Heisman finalist, we all know what went down last year. Okay, the transition in 2022 from Hendon Hooker to Joe Milton wasn't ideal, right? I mean, they were 11-2 a couple years ago, finished in the top 6. Last year, it just wasn't great. Lost 4 games in the regular season. They were 17th They did beat Iowa. But if you look at where they struggled last year, it was pretty much all offensively. They were 526 yards a game offensively in 2022. That was number one in the FBS. Last year, they fell all the way to 19th by averaging just 448 yards a game. Almost all of that drop from 526 to 448 was in the passing game. They fell from 326 yards a game in 22. That was fifth in the FBS to 243 yards per game last year, which was 51st. From fifth to 51st in passing attack. So, Nico Iamaleava coming in as the top recruit, 5-star, very gifted, looked really comfortable in his first career start against Iowa. We know Iowa is a very sound, solid defense. Threw for 151, but accounted for a bunch of yardage with his legs as well. I think if he's a Heisman finalist, not only is Tennessee in the playoff, but Tennessee is a legitimate national championship contender if Nico's a Heisman finalist. Because this offense, and while they learned last year to get by, they did a great job in creating avenues in the run game. The run game got better. And Nico, I think, is a pretty capable weapon with his own legs. So they're still going to be able to put a lot of strain on you, run it with their excellent backs. But they also now have a quarterback that has some real quick twitch speed. Like Joe Milton wasn't a bad runner, but quick twitch speed is something he kind of lacked. Nico doesn't lack that. They just didn't manufacture enough big plays last year. They had 65 plays that went 25 plus yards in 2022. That was the second most in the sport. Last year, they had just 39 plays that went 25 plus. That was right around average in the FBS. So I think that if Nico, if he's capable of playing to the top of the sport at his position, top 3, top 4 quarterbacks in the country, Tennessee is going to be in a great position to win the national championship. It's going to be asking a lot for a guy that has only played one game, but crazier things have happened, especially with a ceiling like that. It wouldn't shock me if Nico's every bit as advertised.
Wow, bold. All right, last one here. Speaking of the playoffs, what if the playoffs don't go chalk?
So I think what you mean by this is basically a G5 team makes a run.
Or there's upsets up above, you know, like the 9, 10, 11, 12 all win a game, maybe 2.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if 9, 10, 11, 12 all win, that's going to force us to really analyze the college football playoff format. Because if 9, 10, 11, 12 all win that round 1 game, what did they do? They went on the road and won games, likely against teams that lost conference championships. So that, I think, is going to be really important to assess, because I think that could alter how the playoffs are formatted moving forward. Maybe they give more bye weeks to teams and treat the conference championship game as a bye week, or maybe you get a double bye week. I don't know. That might happen, because if you're going on the road and winning, then a home playoff game might not be that valuable. I think it is. I'd be absolutely shocked if the road team went 4-0. I actually would be surprised if the road team went better than 1-3. I mean, I think the home teams 5, 6, 7, 8 are going to have a massive advantage playing that game in their own backyard. But either way, I digress. And then I think if there's not chalk in the playoff, we're going to have a lot of people that have not followed the sport super closely coming in and telling us how messed up our sport was for the last 100 plus years. Like, I love our sport. Like, you know me, I love our sport. You've listened to this show. Like, maybe we've met on an airplane. Maybe we've met at a bar, at a restaurant, what have you. Like, I love college football. It's like my favorite thing in the world. And I don't feel like college football was broken for the last 150 years. Okay. Some people think it has been, and some people would not consume the sport because they didn't understand the postseason format. And while I understand, like, I think it was dumb up until 1998 to vote on a national championship. I thought that was dumb. Be the first one to admit, I thought that was dumb. I thought the BCS was a step forward in the right direction. I think the 4-team playoff was an even further step forward. I think the 12 teams, probably a little too many, but not for me to decide. 8 felt right. 12 is what we got, so we're going to accept it. I think we're progressing, but there is a piece of me that's a little concerned about the regular season and seeing rematches and feeling as though games all of a sudden now become disposable and guys, maybe not playing well or maybe holding guys out because they don't need to win a specific game, what have you. Like, yeah, that stuff concerns me. No doubt about it. But we're going to have a whole bunch of people that have never watched the sport tell us how dumb the sport was until this year. And I'm going to probably push back on that because I think the sport was still pretty dang good for the last 150 years. It just, the postseason needed some tweaking to get to a point where people could really engage and really consume and really understand how we crown a champion.
Real quick, would you be shocked if a 5 seed or higher won the national championship this year?
Not at all. Not at all, because teams 1, 2, 3, and 4, I have a hard time envisioning a team outside the SEC, the Big Ten, and the ACC winning a national championship. Like, I think Miami could. I think Clemson could. I think Florida State could. I think the SEC teams are pretty obvious. I think the Big Ten teams are pretty obvious as well. I don't see a scenario where a Big 12 team wins the title, just being honest. So Team 5 is probably going to be better than Team 4. The runner-up in the Big Ten or the SEC is probably going to have more talent on their roster than Team 4. Doesn't mean Team 4 doesn't deserve that first-round bye. Just means there's probably going to be more talent in the SEC runner-up on their roster than there is on Team 4, the Big 12 champion. So if that's the case, then I could see them no doubt winning that game. I think the 5 team's going to have a nice tune-up against the G5 champion, who I don't think in this format, I don't anticipate it being some massively significant challenge for whatever team finishes in the 5 spot. So I think Team 5 is in an incredibly good spot. 1, they're probably going to be from the SEC or the Big Ten. So whoever loses the SEC or the Big Ten title game, so they're crazy talented. They're going to beat the G5 team in round 1 of the playoffs. Then they're going to have a talent advantage over the team that's number 4 and will have already knocked the rust off. So they'll have momentum, probably get that game. And they're going to have to go face the team they probably lost to in the conference championship game. They've already seen them. They went toe-to-toe with them. Maybe this time they can get them. So, yeah, I think Team 5 is in a really good spot heading into this new format. All right, moving into some news and notes now. A couple of pretty significant injuries. Hate seeing these things, by the way. It just makes me sick. You train all off season. You work so hard. And then you get out there, first couple days, acclimation period, not even in full pads yet. And then you're lost for the season. Happened at Notre Dame. Charles Jagusah out for the 2024 season with an injury. I think it's a big blow too, because I look at what Notre Dame has, knowing the 2 departures on the edges of the line of scrimmage. You lose the left tackle in Joe Alt, amazing player. You lose Blake Fisher, the right tackle. Now you lose your likely starter, Jagusah, out, and you got to implement a guy that's been around a lot. You got Tosh Baker. He's a big boy, 6'8", 320 pounds. Was highly regarded as a prospect back in 2020. But this is not great. This is not a position of great depth. This is not a position that has a lot of experience. For all we know, Tosh Baker might be great. We'll see. But as of this moment, that is a legitimate question mark. And it's going to put a lot of strain on Mike Denbrock, the offensive coordinator, to make sure that he protects that left side for Riley Leonard, who was lost last year with an ankle injury. So we want to keep him upright. Even though he's super mobile, he'll help alleviate some of those concerns with the pass rush. Hated to see that, though, for Notre Dame. You also look at Tennessee. The Volunteers, they lost Jordan Thomas, was one of the few veterans in the back end. Based on what I've heard out of camp there in Knoxville, they feel really good about some of their freshmen, but they're still freshmen. So you might see guys on the field a little sooner than you'd like, but to lose a piece in really one of the few question marks on Tennessee's roster is the secondary. They're just going to be young, and they're going to be talented, but they're going to be young. To lose Jordan Thomas, I hated to see that as well. And Nebraska loses Teddy Prohaska to a knee injury as well. Poor guy, man. He just had a run of tough luck. So hate that for him, hoping for a speedy recovery. Another big one coming out of Texas, Austin. Austin, Texas. I said Texas, Austin, but you knew what I meant. CJ Baxter, outstanding running back, out for the year as well. That means Jaden Blue is probably going to be the guy. They were going to be a really talented tandem, but now to have just one guy, and Texas will have other guys step up. CJ Baxter was poised to become a real difference maker, I think, this year for Texas. Started the season as the starter last year, was ultimately, they went in the direction of Jonathan Brooks, and then Jonathan Brooks got hurt, so he was put back in. It was a better player, and then Jaden Blue went off. So you thought that was going to be a position of strength and a position of depth for Texas, but not so much the case anymore. And Pitbull is paying FIU $6 million for 5 years to make sure that there's naming rights there at their stadium, Pitbull Stadium. That's pretty awesome, I suppose. A lot of money, though. A lot of money. And then finally, news out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. What does it matter is my thing. For those that are unaware, the NCAA announced a 4-year show cause for Michigan coach Jim Harbaugh for impermissible contact with recruits and players while access was restricted during COVID-19. Basically, he's banned from college sports until 2028. He has a 4-year, 5-year, $80 million deal to be the Los Angeles Chargers head coach. So I'm not sure what this does. It really doesn't mean anything. Okay. He broke rules. He got punished. He got a show cause. Fine. He's still coaching in the NFL. He's not still at Michigan, so it doesn't impact much moving forward. So that's the update with Michigan. There's more stuff going on. Those things are not related, but just we'll keep you updated with what's going on there. But we like to focus on the field. I don't like to talk about things like that. It's not as fun. There's plenty of places for you to be able to talk about that stuff and talk about, Michigan rules violations and stuff like that. So you know where to find it. Here, we want to talk about ball. We want to talk about the field, and that's what we will always continue to do. We also, when something really fun presents itself, we want to show you that as well. So here is a video that's been making the rounds the last couple of days. The Oregon Duck getting very comfortable in the new cities of the Big Ten. As you can see, trying to climb the gate at Wisconsin. Northwestern doing tons of work naturally, trying to get out there at Illinois, laying down in Bloomington, a little upside down at Purdue. Never disliked that. Ohio State, as Bucky is trying to chase him, Michigan. Not sure what the orange cone is for there, but this is just so much fun. And Oregon so far this year, with funny and ridiculous things like a gigantic inflatable duck that was rolling down the river there at Big Ten Media Days. Oregon's won the offseason with funny things like this. Just great marketing, super fun. And I know it's not taken away from their team. Their team's legit. So really look forward to seeing them in the Big Ten. We will continue to break them down here in the days and weeks to come. Continue to lock it in here with Always College Football. We will get you prepared better than anybody for the college football season. I feel great about that. If you could, though, if you like the show, please like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever you get it, whether it's here on the ESPN YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up button. That'd be awesome. You can also subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a rating, leave us a review. We appreciate you very much for that. So for all of us here at Always College Football, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.